Hey guys, welcome back for today's lecture, Monday, May 4th. May the 4th be with you. Okay, now I got that joke out of the way. Now I can really focus. I hope you guys had a nice weekend. Beautiful weather out. I saw quite a few people out on the lake. I went golfing plenty, which was nice. Um, let's see, there will be no Zoom meeting today. Nothing new to add. We'll still have one on Thursday that I do on everyone at. So we'll go on Thursday. Today we're just gonna continue. I want to finish this hopefully this week, hopefully by Friday, and then we can do the take-home test and we'll be finished. Um, so something I want to try, it's a little different, is I don't know how many are watching. Actually, I know how many are watching because I can see the views. Um, But I feel like some kids, and I know I would probably do this if I were in high school, some may just fast forward to the very end of the video to get the essential question and then either look it up or just kind of go through the slides and find the answer. So I'm going to try something a little bit different. And here's going to be our essential question today. Why did OPEC place an oil embargo on the US in 1973? At this moment, you probably don't know what half those words mean, but I will explain them to you and I will give you the answer. So here we go. First, we're going to talk about the space race. Space race was a huge time in our era, extremely important to the growth of the United States. NASA was created in 1958 as a response to the Soviet satellite Sputnik and Yuri Gagarin, which was the first human being in to go into space. He orbited the planet. After that, the U.S. thought, oh, we should probably get something going. Sputnik was launched in 57, so NASA followed shortly. And then throughout NASA's history, we have different programs. These programs were really just goals and then ways to accomplish those goals. And the first program in NASA was called the Mercury program. Mercury program, the goals were pretty basically get a man into space, launch a man into orbit. That that was the extent of the Mercury program. And in 1961, we sent the first American into space. His name was Alan Shepard. Shepard launches into space. He doesn't get into Earth's orbit, but he is launched through the atmosphere and comes back down to Earth. So we take what we learned from that experience, the science and the math and everything behind it, and the next year we launch John Glenn, who's the first man to orbit the Earth. Does so in about a day, I believe. An entire trip around the planet, which that spaceship has to be moving pretty quickly. Um, so those are the first two Americans into or first two to accomplish those goals. So from there, now that I say first Americans to orbit because, like I said, the Soviets actually had the first man in space and they had the first man to orbit Earth. So they're ahead. But this fuels us to continue growing. And in 1961, President John F. Kennedy stated that his goal was by the end of the decade for America to be on the moon. You know, it was another one of his great speeches. You know, I don't know the exact words, but we hope to put man on the moon. We choose to do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. And he's got I can't do a Boston accent, but just imagine a very strong New England accent. So so the Mercury program ends in either 62 or I guess 62 because that's when its final mission was accomplished. Then another program is launched, and that program is called the Gemini Project. And the Gemini Project was just, it was a further adaptation. The Gemini Project goals were to launch multiple people into space at a time, multiple manned missions. And so they do that, and then they decide to upgrade that to the Apollo program, which the ultimate goal was put man on the moon. Now they can't do that on like Apollo 1, like first mission. You got to take baby steps. You can't, you don't just build a rocket and say, okay, I'm taking this to the moon. Now there's a lot of science and prep that goes into it, and there were some mistakes made. I mean, there were a couple. Oh shoot, I can't remember which one it was. Apollo 7, maybe, where the rockets never left the ground because they caught fire, combusted, and killed all the men on board. So after some trial and error, in 1969, at the end of the decade, which was Kennedy's goal, and out of respect for him because of his assassination and people's revering of him, we made that a very strong goal by the end of the decade. So in 1969, Apollo 11 is launched, and it is the first mission that sent man to the moon. Neil Armstrong, it was a three-man mission. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were the two men that stepped out, walked on the moon. The third man, Michael Collins, was still in the shuttle recording, doing data. These photographs are taken. That's a picture of, I believe, Armstrong. Now, there's conspiracy theories about if we really landed on the moon, and they're absolutely ridiculous to me. It's the biggest thing about the conspiracy they talk about. Well, there's no air in space. There's no wind, so why would the flag be flailing like it is? Well, they knew there was no air in space and there'd be no wind. And what kind of picture takes a picture of a flag that's totally draped along the flagpole and not even showing what the flag is? Like, wow, what an exciting picture. So they planned on putting a kind of slit at the top of the flag and having a rod run across the top of it. So that way it extends the flag out. And then now you see there's a bit of a wrinkle in the flag that makes it look like it's waving. It's not waving. The rod was supposed to extend, and it got jammed at some point, so it hangs a little crooked. And that's what it's not waving. The flag is still right there. It just has a wrinkle in it. And if you see, you can there's multiple pictures taken over the course of a couple seconds. And not in this specific image, but in others, you could see the astronaut moving towards the flag. But that flag doesn't move at all because it's not waving. It's just sitting there. There's no artificial wind being created. There's no conspiracy, no Hollywood movie theater. This actually happened. Now, they planted the flag and left it there, but they realized they left the flag too close to the ship because when the boosters kicked on and they launched from the moon, it was powerful enough to knock the flag over. The flags are still, we've been to the moon 3 times total, I believe. No, 3 or 4 times, because there's been 12 people that have walked on the moon. And we've planted a flag each time, and the flags are all still there. Now, we can't see Apollo 11's flag because it fell down. But the flags from Apollo, I think they're Apollo 15 and Apollo 17 that also ended in moon landings. They are still standing, and we have rovers that take pictures, and we've seen pictures of the flags, and they look a little bit worn, more worn than you would think from 40 years of no wind or air. And most of that's just because the the heat that may be emitted from their proximity, the moon's proximity to the sun at certain times, being that it orbits around the Earth. So that was the moon landing. And that was the race to the moon. Now, this was all a time where this was the greatest educational revolution in American history. Like, education was never stronger, never more uh, advanced and prevalent than during this time, during this late 50s, early 60s. Because we had a hunger, we were in competition. Competition drives everything. Competition makes us better in every way. You know, we get pushed to improve. Education today is just not quite the same. Like, we made incredible advancements mathematically, scientifically, technologically in such a short span. Think about, we didn't even consider space travel in the early and mid 50s. In 1958, we got scared because of Sputnik. We decided to make a program that would accelerate or drive our want to be in space. And so it pushes us to improve. And in 3 years, we launch a man into space. In 4 years, we launch a man into orbit. In 11 years, we get from the Earth to the moon. And we learned about it. And we use that to further our knowledge and curiosity about space in general. We strived to learn. We strived for intelligence. We wanted to be smart. We wanted to be better. And we created some of the greatest accomplishments and advancements in human history during this time. You know, by conquering ignorance, by defeating it. Kids in school learning math, learning what it is applicable to and why it needs to be known. And they wanted to know it. Like, this is, I'm always in awe studying this era because there was no accepting second place. There was no accepting mediocrity. We wanted to win. We wanted to be better. And then once the Soviet Union falls, and with it the space and arms race, we get complacent. We think we're already at the top. Why do we need to work hard? We have a powerful economy. Why do I need to strive for a hardworking and possibly high-paying job? Why can't I just settle? And now we fall into this cycle of, generational circumstance where we think, well, I'm destined to be this because, that's the neighborhood I grew up in or the community I grew up in. We don't accomplish much. We don't strive for much. Like, these people that accomplish these things were average, normal people. Alan Shepard grew up in a small town and was moderately educated growing up. And then, but he had a thirst for science and learning. And then he uses that to launch himself, no pun intended, into NASA. These are just normal guys that accomplished incredible things. And I just love learning about that. And I think we would be so much better served if we took on that mindset. Not everything's discovered, not everything's learned yet. Strive for it, try to get it. Anyways, that's my tangent. All right, now we move on to President Nixon and his foreign policy of détente. The Secretary of State's Henry Kissinger. Kissinger is he's maybe the most well-known of all the Secretary of States that we'll talk about in this chapter. Um, he was actually born in Germany, and when he was 15 years old, him and his family immigrated to the U.S. to escape the persecution of the Nazis because he was Jewish. He moved in 1938, right at the beginning of the rise of the Nazi Party. And he moves to the U.S. and he joins the military and he rises through political ranks and he becomes President Nixon's Secretary of State. And he pushes across the Nixon Doctrine, which is another presidential ideal of assist allies, but don't take on the entire world's defense. Don't be the watchdog or the neighborhood police. Help your friends, but don't stick your nose in everybody's business. That's a direct result of Vietnam. Like, we got in the situation of Vietnam in that pickle because we tried defending the entire world, and that didn't work, obviously. Nixon's foreign policy is highlighted by his visit to China. He's the first American president to ever visit China. And to visit it while they were communist and seemingly an enemy. He turned things around. He saw the Soviets had a break in their relationship with China. China and the Soviet Union had kind of had a split, and Nixon saw this as an opportunity to meld relationships with China. Now, I forgot to mention, détente just by definition means an easing of political tension, trying to calm things down. And that he does that with China first. And he recognizes China. Now, what that means is he recognizes the legitimacy of that government. Before, no U.S. president had ever accepted China as being communist. But now he recognized it, and he recognized the opportunity to work together with China. Now, he does also try and meld a relationship with the Soviet Union and their leader, Leonid Brezhnev. And he visits Moscow, and they create the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, which is SALT I, because there will be a SALT II later on. SALT was an agreement that you cannot continue to build and compile this mass nuclear arms arsenal. You can continue to make nuclear weapons, but you have to get rid of your old ones. Basically, if you want to make a new weapon, you got to melt down the old one. You can't continue to build, like both the U.S. and the Soviet Union agreed to this. You can't further build it without getting rid of the old stuff. So you can adapt, you can improve, but you can't stockpile. And then there's a real contentious situation in the Middle East in 1973. So here's going to be your answer to the question. Now I'm going to give you a lot of details here. OPEC is an organization. It's the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. If you didn't catch that, you can Google it. But OPEC is the Organization for Petroleum Exporting Countries. That means countries that sell oil, that have a lot of oil. And those are mostly in the Middle East. Now, OPEC was originally created with 5 countries. 5 countries, I believe: Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. Now, 4 of those are in the Middle East. Venezuela is obviously in South America. But those 5 countries, they're during this boom of oil, like the world becomes so much more reliant on oil. These Middle Eastern countries are mostly Islamic. Well, there's one Middle Eastern country that's not Islamic, and that's Israel. Israel is they practice Judaism. Now, Israel, as we see throughout all of history, is hated by basically everybody but the U.S. So Israel controls a little bit of territory near the Suez Canal, which is in Egypt, and on the other side they border a country called Syria. Well, and by 1973, both Syria and Egypt are in, or at least Egypt is in OPEC. Both countries, both Syria and Egypt, decided to invade parts of Israel or territories that Israel had claimed to, and try to take them because they were land that Egypt once had, and there was land that Syria once had that they felt that they shouldn't have had taken from them by Israel. The U.S. then airlifts weapons, thousands of pounds or millions of pounds of weapons into Israel for them to use. And this is called the Yom Kippur War because Yom Kippur is a day of Jewish day of fasting and rest and prayer. So both Egypt and Syria invade, thinking that they would catch them by surprise, and they did. They advance pretty deep into Israel within 3 days. But after those 3 days, and with the help of the U.S., Israel is able to repel both Syria and Egypt. And after, I think, 19 days and 20,000 deaths altogether in 19 days, the U.S. helps broker a peace, and basically nothing changes. Like the land goes back to how it was before Egypt and Syria invaded. But the OPEC countries were so upset at the U.S. assisting Israel, because those countries didn't like Israel either, that they placed an oil embargo. An oil embargo is basically banning the trade of oil to the U.S. The U.S. had become very reliant on OPEC countries' oil. And now these countries are refusing to sell oil to the U.S. And this embargo takes place from October of 73 to, I think, April of 74. So that is, 7 months? It really hurts the U.S. in terms of, availability of oil. It also makes oil way more expensive around the world. And eventually they lift the embargo because they found out the U.S. was actually a huge buyer of it. Like these countries didn't have near the market if the U.S. wasn't buying it. And the U.S. could kind of stand on their own. Like we have plenty of oil here too, but it's more expensive and it's not as easily accessible. So OPEC places an oil embargo on the U.S. because of their support of Israel during the Yom Kippur War. That's a very simple answer there. I know I gave you a ton of info, but I just wanted you to kind of understand that situation. It was very tense because the Soviet Union was supporting Egypt and Syria. So it was another kind of indirect battle between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Ultimately, there's not really a winner or a loser. I guess Israel is technically victorious because they repelled Egypt and Syria at the same time from both sides. But they had to come to an agreement. Later on, they end up giving some of the land that both countries wanted because the U.S. told them they're going to keep invading you until they get it, and we can't step in to help you every single time. So it's probably best to give a little bit peacefully. And so Israel agrees to do that at the Paris Peace Accord, which I believe we'll talk about a little later. But that is the OPEC's oil embargo. OPEC being the Organization for Petroleum Exporting Countries, and oil embargo banning trade to the U.S., banning oil trade to the U.S. So, all right, I went a little long day. I apologize, but I did go on that tangent on education and everything. So we'll stop there, and if you need to go back to the question, go back to it. So, all right, guys. Hey, tune in tomorrow. I appreciate you stopping by. Email me if you have any questions. I posted the essential questions assignment. Just add today's question and answer to it. Don't turn it in yet. We'll add to it throughout the week. So, hey, have a terrific day, everybody.